with her therapist and with her behavioral cognitive training group, and she's really frustrated because she's about to start a new job, and then she had a breakdown that it became too hard for her, and she's worried, and she's thinking way into the future, and whatever. The details don't matter. We know the principle of what happens. So it was the perfect opportunity, because she's someone who has a practice, but she's only utilizing it when she's in crisis, or when she perceives herself to be in crisis, which is, I used the metaphor of a snowball going down the hill and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And depending at what point you step onto the hill to stop the momentum of the snowball, it'll be easier the sooner you catch it. Once it's huge, you kind of just got to let it roll over you, accept that that's where you are. And so it was a discussion about starting wherever you are. And that it doesn't mean that she's broken and she can never do this. It means that she's just has to use the practice even when she feels good. She has to use the practice even when she's not defining herself as in crisis, because the practice is an engagement in choosing the direction of your mind all the time. Now, that seemed like an overwhelming thing to her, but she did understand the logic of it. And I said, if you do it once or twice during a day and I said, you have to start congratulating yourself about remembering, and stop beating yourself up about how did I get here and trying to figure it out. You know how you got here. We don't have to discuss that anymore. So what I'm saying in terms of what you just explained, you were saying at some point I'm going to talk about navigating the island of the practical, because when you get here, navigating feels different. But I think when you get anywhere, navigating is different. It's different in that you're remembering more often, forgetting less. Yes, of course, when you cross the event horizon, things have a new look about them, but they're all phases and degrees of all the same principles.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, I would clarify. Yeah, if I could, I would just clarify. So I love all that. We could, but if you had led with that, then I could have just. So I'll just point
Sorry.
out that's one of the reasons. No, you're good.
Yeah,
no,
I know
it's
it's a
good.
long explanation, but
no, it's great discussion though. No, a great explanation. No, so no, I actually every time you speak on it, I enjoy listening. So I'm happy to just sit here and hear what you have to say. That's fine. But with that said, that's one of the reasons I drew this arrow to complementary practices, because I do believe that navigating the island of the practical essentially is altered the moment that your mind is more deliberate. Even in basic alignment, it's more deliberate. So there will be aspects of this that occur then. I think the example that I used was just something that was more relative to this group, and our minds have really changed compared to what they used to be. I think most of us can agree. And then with that, navigating the island of the practical will always be relative to the totality of that cup that you're arriving with now. And that begins to change deliberately the moment you enter this practice. So yeah, I think it would be relative to, but the reason that I say that I'm ready to potentially add that to the overall method now is just because the overall method is also something that's continuing to evolve. So I'm just now adding that, and I have more time to dedicate to adding this, somehow interweaving it to everything that we talk about, because it is important. But I think navigating the island of the practical probably would encompass most of these complementary practices. That's really the reason, especially the one that I'm going to talk about today with the allies of power. Even hydrostasy movement, that is a way to navigate the island of the practical. Hydrostasy absolutely is a way to eventually in hydrostasy, I don't have to look at the board here, but eventually in hydrostasy, I start to talk about how to direct personal power. And when I talk about that, just like everything else, it is not abstract ideology, philosophy, and wordplay. It is, where do you put your attention in order to direct personal power or that creative energy? And it's not just creative, it's a lot of things, but And I could talk about that too in vivid detail. So all that makes sense so far? Okay. So let's say, so today I'm going to talk a little bit about what I'm calling now the allies of power. So where would I enter this into the practice? So this is kind of like what Donna was saying. It's not just after we have dissolved the atrophy effect that these things become valid, or they become useful, or they, can become something that we can use in our experience so that we can enjoy it more. We can feel more peace. We can feel more vibrancy, more connection. So we all want that. So all of these can help at different phases of this practice, but most of this can be introduced right at the very beginning. I don't see anything wrong with right when somebody is like, okay, I really want to start doing this all the time, like Donna said. Maybe when it's not just a crisis, I can do this practice and see how that affects it when I do enter crisis. So maybe preparation for said crisis can be beneficial for said crisis. That kind of makes sense. So maybe this person is like, all right, I'm going to give this a try. And Donna's like, try the rings of power. I think that would work. Maybe. It all just depends on the person, but I don't see why not, because it's really easy to understand the rings of power. Does that make sense? So this is another one that I think as soon as a person is ready to embody. So I'm not sure I would put the allies of power in basic alignment, because I have created basic alignment for somebody who's not quite ready to embody. Just to be fair, that's okay. Not everybody wants to embody tea. They're just like, I want a little bit, I want to sip some tea when I want to sip some tea. Now, stop telling me what to do. And that's okay. And I love that. And I have essentially designed this practice to allow for that component, because that's a huge, I would like that. If Jean gave me this organized practice, I'd be like, all right, put the practice on the table, leave the room, and I'm going to look at this myself. I don't need you to tell me what to do. I'll ask questions, Does that make sense? I'm a rebel like that. Not everybody is, I get it. It's just the totality of our experience being expressed now. I'm doing that, you're doing that, we're always doing that, and that's fine. Does that make sense so far? So this practice is called, and this is a practice, this is something we can do, and it could be interjected the moment a person decides to embody. So I do believe that this could be a critical component to basic alignment all the way through your practice until you're 110 years old, gardening, doing whatever you're doing. So what I'm about to explain really goes well with the act of allowing. So rather than declaring war on thought, which is what some practices want to do, which is what some philosophies suggest, is that we should be in a state of no mind, or that thinking is essentially an enemy of the state. So what is occurs very often in the island of the practical. The mind goes from one extreme to the extreme opposite, thinking that the extreme opposite is the solution. So we just got to go to the exact opposite of what we're doing and everything will be fine. So this practice doesn't necessarily suggest that. You could do that with this practice if you so chose. If Jean is like, I don't want to think anymore, I do believe that this practice could be beneficial towards that goal if that's what he wanted to do. However, Jenny down there, she's like, I love my thinking. I enjoy thinking, but I want it to be functional. I want it to serve me. This practice is perfect for that. So we don't have to declare war on thought with this practice because of the act of allowing. That's super critical to this practice. It is just directing your attention where you choose. That's it. This practice can be summed up in that one sentence. Choosing where you have placed your attention in the moment happening now is the tea practice. And all of this that we're doing is really just because we're not used to that. We have been introduced to a society, to a life that really is not teaching us and is not necessarily designed for us to be placing our attention deliberately and on purpose as we see fit. That's not really introduced to us. Just like I never learned once in school about this thing in our body called the cannabinoid system. Why not? It regulates my homeostasis. It's a valid system in the human body. Why not? because it's related to cannabis. Cannabis bad. Do you see what I mean? So the entire structure has been designed for a purpose, and I'm not declaring war on that purpose either, and I'm not going to, go from one extreme to the other. Now we have to declare war on the man. So this practice is also nothing like that. All right. So does all that make sense so far? And I'll start talking about this new practice that I call the allies of power. Ida, so reversing, I'll just touch on that for a second. Reversing years of conditioned thinking. So I can see why you would say that, Ida. That does really make sense, and sometimes it feels like that for sure. But the way that I would look at it is, I have created this web. I'm a spider, and I have created a web. And I'm not going to reverse my web. How do I do that? Do I put it back in my butt? Like, how does a spider reverse its web? I've never seen that happen. So I thought you'd find that funny, Ida. That was for you. So, instead, what we're doing is we're just now focusing on our web as we create it. That's it. And unless Gene wants to create a crappy web, he's probably going to create a more elegant web because that's his desire. He's paying attention to that process now. And he's going to create a conscious, aware, deliberate web as opposed to the old webbing that was highly conditional and being influenced by the four destroyers. And the four destroyers are fed by the atrophy of awareness. They feed each other. Does that make sense? So old thinking dissolves in the lack of giving it attention. Correct. I agree with that, yes. Rather than correct and true, I agree. I see what you mean. Hey, I'm deliberate with my language, and you're actually seeing the process of me redirecting language. In 5 years, I won't make that flip. I won't say that word at all. True and correct. Okay, so any questions? And then I'm just going to dive into this new topic. All right, so I can now handle the word spider without flinching. Exactly. That is an evolution of consciousness. It is. That is an example of the evolution of your consciousness. Your mind has changed over time. Before, you couldn't handle the sight of spiders. Now, spiders are iffy. They're not your friends. They're not going to crawl on your face with no issues, but you also don't feel the need to necessarily end its life because it's crawling on your wall. It's like, okay, I can collect you in a jar, put you out in nature, and now you have a choice. Keep coming back in, and I don't know. When I scoop you into the jar, this might not end well. I can't guarantee I won't break one or two of your legs. I'm doing my best, though. Hey, it happens, though. Spiders are quite fragile. But we're still trying to get them outside. The intention is there. But all right, so the reason that I would put this into the second phase of this practice when we really start to embody it is because we're starting to interact with our thought. That is the difference. So in basic alignment, I am not necessarily suggesting that anybody do anything with their thinking. Does that make sense? I'm not telling anybody to redirect thought. Checking in and going back to your trick of attention isn't necessarily because of your thinking. You're just doing it as often as you can remember. And that's basic alignment. Check in, go back to your trick of attention. Check in, back to your trick of attention. And do some fox walking. Do some four modes practice. Pay attention to some transitions. These are the things I've offered. And then a person will probably come to you and say, well, you know, what about when I'm at the office and I have my coffee cup? Could I make a practice? And you're like, yes, of course you can. That's an excellent opportunity to interject deliberate attention. And now they kind of turn that into a practice. And then they're like, well, what about when I'm being met with these challenges and I'm being met with creating problems with anxiety and depression and things like that? How can tea start to help with that? Well, if we're really going to get into those types of things, we do now have to interact with the thinking. So the only thing that I can recommend, if a person truly wants to dissolve. I think dissolve is the best word. Dissolve anxiety, dissolve depression, dissolve some of the overthinking and the emotion that we're creating that doesn't benefit us, that we don't want. We must interact with the thinking, because the thinking is what's creating it. So at that point, the only thing I am prepared to offer is embodiment. Maybe somebody else can offer hypnotism. Maybe somebody else can offer this method for this result. That's great. And I think that there's plenty of room in this world for different things. So that's why this is embodiment approach. It's not the way, but I do believe that if a person does this practice, because of the way that it interacts with principles, it can work for everybody. Everybody outside of extreme psychology. You know, there are forms of mind psychology that attention is not necessarily as easily placed deliberately. So we would call that abnormal psychology. So there may be examples, and they would be very rare. And just to be blunt, nobody listening to this currently would fall into that category. So that's not your excuse. I'm just kidding, except for Jean. Okay, so now that we're interacting with our thought, what this practice does not do, and this is an important key, it's not necessarily telling you that you should think positive. It is not necessarily telling you that you should think this way as opposed to that way. Does that make sense? That could be an act of force. Then again, it could be exactly what is beneficial for you, and it could be the lowest hanging fruit. So, you know, balance is a relative thing, and we do need to learn how to interact with that. And by learning, I mean feeling it. We can feel what's in balance, what's not in balance, and that's definitely something that we talk about as we interact with this practice. So now that we're interacting with our thought, this practice is based around a pillar that I call the act of allowing, meaning just directing our attention, not necessarily trying to change emotion, not necessarily trying to change a situation, not necessarily trying to achieve a particular goal, although many goals can still be achieved through this practice, of course, but it's not necessarily for that purpose. The purpose is because that is our birthright. That's what we were born doing. That's what every animal, every species on Earth is doing, at least to a degree, paying attention, engaging the world around them. The human being has actually created a type of psychosis where their attention goes so far into their thought that they're unaware. They're dumb, deaf, and blind to spirit, to essence, to the movement of the world around them. I was like that. So I'm not just talking about other people. So yeah, I was knee deep in that myself. And I know that there are people who are knee deep in that now. And we're all in a different version, perhaps, of deepness. So that's why this practice is so dynamic. You don't really level up from it. You don't really move, graduate from one thing to another. It's always 2 degrees, and it's always applicable forever. That's one of the different things about this practice, even in the movement. The movement isn't building so that you can just do new things. The movement is being introduced so you can do this every day for the rest of your life if you want to. If you don't want to, you can go do whatever you want to do. Of course. So does that make sense so far? All right, so now that we're interacting with our thought, because we're choosing to embody, and, well, what are we doing with our thought? You can do whatever you want as long as it's on purpose, but ultimately, this practice is suggesting that you redirect your thought back to the present moment somehow. Somehow. So that's what we'll get into today, is the mysterious somehow. So what I have recommended with T, ultimately, but Ida, if you want to think everything is working out for me, that's fine. If that makes you feel better and interrupts the repetitive habitual cognition, it can be beneficial. It could be a lowest hanging fruit. If you want to tell yourself that financial wealth is just a thought away, and that does interrupt the repetitive habitual, now when that becomes repetitive and habitual, you're swimming in the same sticky soup. And that is very likely going to occur with that type of statement. because just thinking about the Heisman Trophy will never get the Heisman Trophy delivered to you in the mail. But the Heisman Trophy is just energy, just like money. It's just far more rare, so it doesn't fit the analogy. It actually does, but just not the way that it's being presented. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to use the pillars of T, and I'll show how this, it doesn't graduate, but they do build upon each other. It's the accumulation effect. So it builds as it accumulates, and something begins to occur and change as it accumulates. So it's not levels, it's not higher. I saw this again today, and I just immediately exited Facebook, but somebody said something about a stone, and then the reply is, your vibration is too low. And it's like, oh gosh, here we go again. Now, let me guess, you are a higher vibrational being, and I'm a lower vibration. And so again, this practice just completely, but that's the way the person was saying it, as if that person was unable to perceive the energies from that stone because they're a low vibrational person. And this practice just does not buy into any of that. It's not, that's a belief system that can exist completely outside of T. And you can have it, you can own it. I don't really care about that belief, but it's not necessarily reflected or expressed in the T practice at all. Not really. So we'll start with the first three pillars of T and how that relates to your voice, your internal dialogue, because we're not seeking necessarily in this practice to go to no thinking. We're not necessarily wanting to go to a certain type of thinking. We're not going from one type of thinking to another type of thinking, thinking that the new thinking is somehow better thinking, because that's still, at the end of the day, a whole lot of cognition turned in on itself in these little mysterious bubbles inside of our brain. And that's great, and it can be very beneficial if we allow it. If we allow that cognition to be beneficial, it will be. How do we allow it? How do we allow cognition to be something? By choosing where our attention is in the present moment. The more we do that, the more our ideas begin to flow and we get to this point in this pillar. So if that's all good, I'm going to start to explain that. So I'll save this whiteboard. I should remember. I will remember to post these in the group chat. So let's start with the first three pillars of T and how that can relate to your internal voice. And these voices become your ally. It's something that you can use all throughout the day, anytime that you find yourself thinking repetitive, habitual thoughts that do not serve you. So we have three pillars. And I know for a fact, I feel it in my tummy, that you guys know these three pillars. Now, the next three we haven't talked about for years and years, although they have existed since day one, honestly. The next three pillars that we talk about have existed since I first created this practice, so it's not new. So what is the first pillar? And then we'll talk about that voice. These do tend to go chronologically, I guess, the way that we say them, because it is procedural. It's an order of operation. So what's the first order of operation?
Presence.
Presence. Okay. And if I'm going to be fair, you can call this whatever the hell you want to. I don't care. I call it the voice of presence. I guess I'm not that creative. But what that means is that I am going to think thoughts, especially when I find myself in repetitive habitual thought that doesn't serve me, but as often as I can remember, if I'm still just checking in, I am going to use my voice to remind me to be present. And Dawn is thinking to herself, well, we've been doing this the whole fucking time. Like, what are you talking about? Yeah, I know. I'm just organizing it into a practice that we can remember, that we can use, and that can benefit us to help us, execute the practice and be more present, engage the moment with tricks of attention, or points of attention, if that's the word. I think sometimes that's a better way to describe it. Points of attention, because tricks can seem confusing to people. I stole that from Don Juan. So, yeah. All right, so here's a scenario. Especially if you're new in the practice, this is going to be the first voice that you work with the most. But as you go throughout the day, especially if you notice yourself in cognition that doesn't serve you, you will talk to yourself rather than declaring war on the internal voice, rather than just trying to change it. This isn't cognitive behavioral therapy. This isn't that. So all this is using the voice now to point back to presence. And we talked a lot about this in the beginning because I did this. This is exactly how I did it. I would use words, and sometimes we called it a mantra, but it wasn't always a mantra. It was just words. I was just talking to myself about the present moment, even to the point of naming objects around me. So I would tell myself, here I am in this moment, in this life, with this body. That's reasonably accurate. I want to say reasonably because I could be in a computer-generated matrix, who knows? But if I'm not, then I am here in this body, in this life, with this breath, and I have this moment to be present. I have this beautiful painting behind me to appreciate. Now I added the voice of appreciation with the voice of presence, and I'm starting to talk to myself with two different voices. And I'm calling them voices because I'm categorizing the direction of our cognition. I'm again so I call it the traps of thinking. That's a categorization. Yeah, categorization of thinking. So is this. It's just a different direction. This is the direction we want to go with our cognition, as opposed to that direction, and it's directional. I'm not telling you what to think. Gene has all kinds of different stuff around him, so he probably wouldn't say, here I am. Well, no, he could say Ida's painting because he can see in his computer monitor is Ida's painting, so there is that, but yeah.
It's just the concept
Otherwise,
of doing
yeah.
something, not doing something. It's the voice of doing something. You can't not do something. You can't not worry.
Right.
But you can focus your
Right.
attention.
I see what you mean. Okay, yeah. So the voice of not doing something would be like, don't worry about this. And you're like, but I am really fucking worried about this. And you're like, everything is going to be okay. But he's about to punch me in the face, and that's probably not going to be okay. And so there's like, that is actually cognitive dissonance. So people are like, well, what's, cognitive dissonance? No, cognitive dissonance is when you're saying something in your mind that is disproportional to how you feel and what you're experiencing.
It feels
so
like a lie. It
yeah.
feels like you're telling you. That's why when you use the term telling yourself true things, it doesn't really matter whether we're humans in this body or whether that's true or not. It's just that that's something I can relate to that brings me to the present moment. And it doesn't feel like a lie. If I'm saying everything's okay when I feel miserable, then it feels like a lie.
Years ago,
I agree.
I made myself a tape of my own voice doing positive affirmations, but I didn't believe myself because it didn't sound like I was telling the truth, if you know what I mean. It just didn't work.
But here's the thing. I really think that painting is beautiful. I really appreciate it. So that is now. That is present. That is occurring. That is the second ring of power. And the more that I pay attention to this painting, the more that I feel something in my body. I'm like, there's a feeling associated with the connection that I'm making to this painting in the now moment. And that's it. That's the gist of this practice. Connection is occurring. Flow is happening. I'm feeling love and appreciation and joy because I used words to direct my mind there. That's it. You're using words in this practice, the new one that I'm describing. It's not really new. It's just an organization of material so that we can work with it. So the first one is the voice of presence, and that's probably the one that a person would need to work on first in order to accumulate the energy and the understanding, and by understanding, I mean experience portion of knowledge. Get a little bit of experience of it, and then you're like, oh, okay, I see what the fuck he's talking about. Like, this is starting to make a little bit of sense. I'm going to use, and so let's say situationally, let's say I'm going to use Jenny if you don't mind, but at the dispensary, this is probably really easy for Jenny because this is again how a wide variety of people could enter this practice and use it for their benefit, how they see fit. And I love that. So Jenny is not new to some of these concepts of presence, of mindfulness, of, deliberate breathing and all of this stuff. This isn't new stuff. But another person may come in and they could be like, what's all this voodoo nonsense that they're talking about, like existential bullshit? I get it. So I have designed this practice so that it could actually be beneficial for everybody, not just one person or one type of person. So if Jenny's at work, what this practice would look like is, here I am. I have a job. I'm in the moment. I have all of these things around me, these friends that I enjoy being around. I have a job that really isn't that difficult, that I can enjoy, and I can interact with people and I can help people. This is all happening now. You're not necessarily describing philosophy. It's pointing to what is occurring when it's occurring. Do you see what I mean? So when I would be driving down the interstate, here I am, able to drive at 70 miles an hour, just like that. Isn't that cool? That will actually start to get to the act of seeing. And the act of seeing is when you really start to notice that appreciation and these perspectives, and it's all of a sudden, it's like, holy shit. Like throughout human history, we went 10,000 years without achieving 60 miles an hour unless you were falling off a fucking cliff, and then that's not going to end well for you. Yeah, human beings did achieve over 60 miles an hour, but it did not end well for them. Right. So if we had a note card that was going to be around the allies of power, the first ally is the voice of presence. That could be your ally. You can collaborate with the voice of presence and the essence of presence. And the note card could even direct to the voice that directs to the present moment. So my note card could say, in this moment, where is your voice of presence? And then I would start to name things around me. I would start to and it doesn't have to be necessarily appreciation. You can literally just name things around you. And that's true. In this moment, there's this bracelet, there's this rock that Ida painted, there's this receipt from Terrapin Care Station from 2018. That's how much I paid for cannabis in 2018. If you can believe it, $92. That's not bad. Buy one thing in Illinois for $92. That's a complete side point, though. All right, so does the first ally, the first voice, make sense? Any questions about the first one that I could answer, and then we could move on to the second voice of power, or excuse me, the second voice of that we're collaborating with here. And nobody has to tell you what to think or what to say. This is you. You could own this, and you can make it whatever you want it to be, as long as this voice is just pointing to the present moment. That's really it. And then let's say Gene starts doing this, and he's brand new to tea. He's never really sensed into his body. He doesn't know about all this existential, I'm not my thought. This is kind of all new to him. But he's been doing it. He's been noticing a lot about his attention and his cognition. He really understands asset and sensory attention training. It's all very scientific. We can see it. Like, this all does really make sense. Our attention, where we place our attention, that's where everything is going. Like, that's not abstract philosophy and magic. We can see that. We can observe that. And because we've been doing this practice a little bit, we can notice it. And now Gene is, here I am in this grocery store, in this body. There's that shopping cart. And is that Doritos and Oreos? Like, oh, damn, they're going hard on the calories this week. And then all of a sudden you notice that you're judging the present moment in a way that doesn't serve you. You judging another person's Oreos has never served you. The most that it will do is inflate your imaginary sense of self. And if you inflate that, you will attach to it. And if you attach to it, you create ego. And if you attach to ego, you create narcissism. And if you create narcissism, you get, I know what came to your mind. Well, I know what came to my mind. I guess I don't know what came to your mind. I'm sorry, that was not a true statement. Yes, Ida, that is what came to my mind. And I had a feeling that would come to others' minds, but I'm not going to say it.
You mean the former guy?
Yeah. Okay, so the next voice, this shouldn't surprise you. What is the second pillar of T?
Mindfulness.
Mindfulness. And mindfulness, in a short definition that has been supported, I can find the book by Teek. Teek, my boy, I really like Teek. Teek Nhat Hanh. I don't think I say it correctly, but Dalai Lama also tends to agree with this definition of mindfulness. So at least we got Buddha and, you know, the sages to agree with this one, that mindfulness is a mind that is not necessarily labeling, judging, comparing, contrasting the present moment. So if you are able to look at a cup with no cognition necessarily occurring, notice the consistency of my language. Necessarily. Thoughts don't necessarily have to occur, but we're going to remind me about this, and I'll get back to this at the end, because that's really what we're getting to here. So this practice will have a deliberate effect. That's what we're getting to. So the second is mindfulness. So mindfulness is, I'm going to do it right now. That's it. I'm just not thinking any thoughts about it necessarily. Okay, that's easy, right? Does anybody have any questions about mindfulness?
Yeah, orange
So,
came to mind.
yes.
Orange came to mind.
Orange.
They evaluated it. They put a name to it.
You evaluated it?
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell you that that was a wrong thing to do, Gene.
Still having the
fine.
desired effect, so
Mm-hmm.
pointed in the right
That was
direction.
That was a little bit of the voice of presence, saying what color it is. So I'm okay with that. I'm not. Well, that's actually the reason we have a third pillar, is because the mind is going to go back. It's so used to thinking mindfulness is just a little speck of your day without the third pillar, but we'll get to that. So the second pillar of T is mindfulness. Could mindfulness be described as considering? You can consider mindfully, yes. So if you're considering,
As long as you don't judge.
so for example, Ida, let's say I walk up to a path, and this path has 3 different ways I could go. And I stand up to this path, and I just look. And I start walking down the path. That could have been mindful consideration, because I didn't necessarily judge the path or think about the path, but I could have still evaluated it to a certain extent with my senses. So Don Juan would say, feel which path to go down, right, with your body. So I can still be logical, I can still deduce, I can still consider, I can do all of that cognition without necessarily thinking words about it. And if I do, I could be in flow. I could be in synchronization. Yes. Mm-hmm.
There's 3 paths.
Yes,
you stand in front of it.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're not using words to make judgments, right? We're not judging it.
Mm-hmm.
One of those paths is underwater, and it's muddy, and I see that. I observe that.
Right.
I mean, I am in front of the paths now, and I'm looking, and the first thing that comes to mind is, I don't want to be walking down that path. Now that's a judgment, right?
It is. It is. That's why I say not necessarily thinking, but that could have been a functional form of thought. We're not declaring war on thought. So that thought doesn't necessarily, the moment it occurs. So let's use this example. So let's say Gene walks up and the river has started to overflow. So one of the paths, that's the path that he really wants to go because it's straight. The other paths maybe are going to take a little bit more time. He can see that they're curved. Still didn't have to think a thought about that because he's smart. He can deduce. He can just look, and he knows these things instantly, that these paths are curved, this one's straight. And he already knows the shortest distance to a point is just that straight path. So he really wants to go down that way. That's his desire. Just like it's the fox's desire to go across the frozen lake, right? The fox doesn't have a voice of words necessarily, but it can still deduce by walking gently, deliberately, and cautiously. So there is a way that Gene could say, oh shit, the path is overflowed and that's the way I want to go. But you know what? I can do this. That's fine. Now I've just actually described this practice in a few different ways, and we can use this example actually throughout this entire thing now if we want to. We can stick to the same example. But So without thoughts necessarily. Now, let's say Gene has this thought, though, and it starts to become repetitive because of the habitual desire to control. And now he's just thinking, God damn it, this always happens to me. And now, you know, I can't do this. I might as well just go around and it's whatever, you know, God damn it. And so he starts to think that way. Now the thought is no longer serving him. He just crossed that slippery, invisible slope between functional and dysfunctional cognition. And it's not benefiting him now. So that's not a voice of power. That's a voice of repetitive, habitual. That is the opposite of the voice of power. You're leaking power now, probably. Getting down about, Gene, you didn't overflow the path. That's not your fault, man. Nature is nature, and give yourself a break. You didn't create that. That's okay. You are creating the resistance to the present moment, though. That is your creation, and that could equal you going a different direction, and then you get zapped by lightning, and then it's like one thing led to another, man. You see what I mean? So if we continue to use this example, Gene walks up and he's like, okay, his body reacts with God damn it, because he has created a spider's web, and his body responded with frustration. That's his body remembering the old patterns, the old habits. It happened. You are where you are. You're probably not necessarily happy about what is occurring because you got to do something now that you didn't have to do before. It's inconvenient. Yeah, sure. But he immediately goes to his practice. This is what it would look like. Gene, I am here in this body, in this life, and that is an inconvenience that I can overcome. I can do this. So now we're getting into a different voice, but the voice of mindfulness would remind Gene that he doesn't have to judge this situation with his mind, that he doesn't have to think thoughts about it necessarily. So the reason that I would say that this point is probably closer to warrior training, that a person would do this, is because you gotta believe this. I mean, this is something that you have to believe, that I don't have to think thoughts about this to figure it out. That I can look, I can listen, I can observe, I can, wait if that's what's necessary for the aha to occur. I don't always have to do it right here, right now, right this second. Maybe I can just walk around. I can just go do this for a second and then I got an idea. I can just swim and I'll be fine. It's good. I can throw my clothes across and so they'll stay dry, and I'll just cross the river and then I'll get to the other side, and I'm kind of stinky anyway, so I'll wash up while I'm in the river, and then I'll get to the other side. I'll dry out. That'll feel good. Letting the sun just soak up that water. I'll put on my clean clothes and I'll go about my way, and that was fine. That actually wasn't a problem now that I think about it. You see? Yeah. And then he comes up 20 minutes later, and the path is also, it's got almost the exact same example. He doesn't need to go down that repetitive, thing. He just does. He just knows what to do. He's experienced it. He's learned, and he'll express that knowledge unto wisdom and just do what he has to do in flow without trying to control. So the voice of mindfulness is reminding you that you don't necessarily have to think repetitive, habitual thoughts about the situation. So in this example, it would be, here I am in this mind, in this life, in this body. I don't have to judge their shopping cart. It's okay. I don't have to do that. Does that make sense? The voice of mindfulness. The voice of mindfulness is a bit tricky because mindfulness is not necessarily thinking about the present moment, but it's also giving yourself permission when you do. It's reminding yourself that, hey, I'm actually choosing to do this now. That's different than doing it accidentally. I'm going to choose to use my mind and my attention to point to the present moment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's a level of acceptance there.
There is. Yeah. That's actually skipping ahead a little bit, but yeah.
There's a gap.
But there is a level of acceptance, yeah.
Excuse me, there's a gap. When you're thinking mindfully, there's a space.
Mm-hmm.
For me, there's a space comes in, and it allows you to not go where you would have went before. Put it that way.
Yes, there's a feeling. There's a feeling to it. When your mind is spinning and you're thinking your way through, you're trying to think your way out of the problem, you're trying to solve the problem, there's a feeling about that. And when you're present and then mindful, you're aware that you're being present, you can feel the difference. This slowing of that spinning happens, and a different state of attention can be felt.
Yes, and what I would recommend is using this practice to point back to your tricks of attention. That's pretty much what we're always doing. So let's say that you're going for a hike, and you just notice that you're judging everything. Like it's like you're looking around and you see trash and you're judging that, and that's okay. That's what your mind is used to doing. We don't have to leak power over it at this point, and we understand that. So we can tell ourselves that we're present, we're in this life, we're in this body, so that's using the voice of presence. And I don't necessarily have to think all of these thought streams. They may be true. You know, this is an issue. People just throwing their shit on the ground. That's not okay. But I don't have to think all of these thoughts about it. That's not necessarily going to benefit me. I'm going to go back to the feeling of the sunshine on my skin. I'm going to go back to the fact that I'm with my family right now. And in this transient existence, I'm not going to take that for granted. I'm going to engage my family because I care about them, you know, and everything is moving, everything is changing. You know, Jean's grandkids, they're only kids for a little while, and then they're just people. They're just, you know, I get it, we still call them our kids, but when they're in their 20s and 30s, it's not the same. Well, I don't know. It is. It kind of is, yeah. I get it. Because I just thought about Kobe at 21, and yeah, he's still my kid. Okay, so the voice of mindfulness, are there any questions about that? It's, again, so it's using the word I, sometimes it will seem this way. It was for me, I don't have to, but that's a true thing. I don't have to think repetitive thoughts about this. I can go, and then it goes, Donna, I'm not just thinking about not doing, and then I go back to my trick of attention. So just like Jean asked a long time ago, after we do our rule of three, we go back to our trick of attention. That's why we did it. We created the space so that we could go back to our practice, right? So the voice of mindfulness can be an ally in our practice, and we can talk ourselves into this mindfulness moment. And somebody might be like, well, wait. How can you talk yourself into a state of not talking? And that's where your trick of attention comes in. You really can't. You can't talk yourself into not talking, but you can talk yourself into a gap, like Ida was saying. And it's a calming voice. It can help calm you. Exactly. Exactly. Aware of your surroundings, but not creating resistance in the moment. Perfect. I agree. And do you see how in doing this practice, these voices could be beneficial if you can remind yourself to use them? If you can remind yourself to use these allies, all of a sudden the thinking that you've done today has been on your side. It has been serving you, and it has been serving your practice. Whereas before, a lot of your thought was feeding the four destroyers. Whether you realized it or not, it was. All right, so hour and 11 minutes, let's move on. So we have the third voice, and then that's going to be one of the big allies as we enter warrior training and seers training. Well, seers training would be the next three allies, but so the third ally is what?
The third pillar is deliberate intention.
Exactly, deliberate intention, attention. I think attention is more accurate with how we're using it. Intention is just as accurate, but I would have to explain that a little bit more. But because our intention follows our attention. That's another thing, that whether we realize it or not, our intending that's happening now is a result of where our attention is happening now. So they work together. So the attention, deliberate attention, the voice of deliberate attention is now that's reminding you of all of your tricks of attention. That's easy. If we use these three voices in tandem, that is, here I am in this life, in this body. I don't have to judge this person. I don't have to get angry. That's not something that needs to occur. Instead, and this is the third voice, I can engage the world around me. I can pay attention to the sunshine. I can pay attention to the fact that I have a job, even though this customer's yelling at me. I can pay attention to the fact that 3 o'clock don't come regardless. I'm gonna get there, and then I'm gonna have that moment where I'm at home and I have my shoes off and everything is working out for me again. So everything is changing. I woke up sad. Let's say that I woke up sad. So the voice of presence would remind me, the voice of presence and mindfulness, and then I'm going to use this third voice, would remind me that I don't have to try to change sadness. I can just keep moving with my attention. I can just keep moving with my practice, and everything is always changing. So I'm not going to lose my peace. I lost my happiness, maybe, because I'm not feeling my best today, but I haven't lost my peace. So I know that I'm going to go back. I know that that's the direction of my momentum, is from peace to everything else. So I'm all good. That's a form of talking to yourself. I did this. So in my practice, especially when I was at the restaurant working with Long, I would remind myself of these voices. I didn't have it organized like this, but I would remind myself of what I can do. I, in this moment, can place my mind anywhere that I want to. And right now, I want to use defocused vision. That's the third voice. Right now, I want to sense into my feet. Right now, I want to, and then do. And then that is the third voice. But now what I'm recommending is literally wording it out in your own head. You're saying it to yourself as you do it. So now that voice that was going at 500 miles an hour is still going at 400, but it's deliberate. It's going the direction you've chose it to because you're saying your practice to yourself. And over time, because of what the practice is doing, which is paying attention to the present moment, the thought will also naturally reduce. And that's a great, benefit that eventually I would postulate that all of you will be able to go a good period of time without thinking necessarily. Or when the thinking does occur, it's probably going to be functional and it's not going to feel heavy and it's not going to be a stream. It'll be idea. Or, it just floats in and you're just like, oh, there's an idea. And that's kind of what that master was talking about when he's like, just let ideas float through your mind. And as a beginner, you're like, I can't fucking do that. Okay, there's that thought, but hey, wait, no, that's a good thought. No, I need that thought. That thought's important. Come back thought. And then that thought leads to another thought that leads to another thought that's not the thought that you began with, and you don't really want that thought. But the chain reaction has already begun, and now you're feeding the 4 destroyers again. All right, so the third voice is the voice that is essentially pointing towards, and even sometimes it's describing what you're doing. You're describing the trick of attention to yourself. You're talking it out in your own mind. In a manner of speaking, you are coaching yourself. That's why this is an empowerment approach. It's not you follow me. It's not Ernest is the master or, his lineage of the Buddhist master of antiquity. It's nothing like that. It's you. So you can talk out your practice and tell yourself what you're doing. And guess what? That will also prove the practice more and more and more to yourself. And then these next 3 pillars will start to really manifest. They'll start to be more accessible. Before you know it, the next 3 pillars are low-hanging fruit as well. All right, so any questions so far about what I'm suggesting? How these voices can become your ally. You can use them. That's what allies, we're working to, and I say use, I would actually prefer collaborate. You can collaborate with these allies. Does that make sense? And if you want to, you can imagine them. You can dress them up in your mind if you want to. You will once I describe it in my book, but I get really imaginative with it because I care about my mind and my cognition, and I care about my life experience. So I will imagine these allies sometimes as spirits, as entities. I'm going to collaborate with this entity that I call present, vibrance, aliveness, nowness. All right, so any questions about the first 3 allies? It kind of makes sense, right? Can you do it? I mean, does it make sense? I know you can do it, but does it sound like, in your own mind, does it sound like something you could do?
It does sound like something I can do because I think I've been doing it anyway. When I go to those
Yes.
3 areas, there are
Mhm.
words in my head, and I talk myself through them.
Mhm.
So, but now I'll dress them up in a tutu or something, and
That's it.
Well,
Exactly.
this
That's
is
it.
everything
Yeah.
we've discussed in the beginning of the practice so many years ago.
Mhm.
But I think the
Mhm.
subtle difference, seeing it from the degree of practice that I have now, is that what you're saying is the deliberate effect is the intention. Words or no words, too many words. It's not which word, it's not which technique, it's not which level, which stage. It's the desired effect. That's the intention. So there's a desired effect from presence. There's a desired effect. And to me, it's just a different way of talking about the rings of power that you had introduced. Yeah,
Mhm.
as long as you're pointed, it's not the painting that has the power. It's not even the appreciation of the painting that has the power. It's the deliberate presence, mindfulness, and the noticing the way you feel and whether that's pointed in the right direction, in a desired direction, in a less resistant direction.
Mhm. Well, and if I'm going to say less resistant, that means the second ring of power, because resistance isn't necessarily how I'm interacting with the present moment. That's the way that word is commonly used. But when I use the word resistance in T, that is any time that I'm not engaging the now moment, I'm resisting it. I'm either doing it actively or passively, but it is occurring. It is a form of resistance.
2 degrees.
And at least 2 degrees. But what we're recommending is that we become so present and so mindful, and our power starts to flow to the point where we are moving and interacting with everything as it's occurring, and that's hydrostasy. We're adapting. It dissolves this idea of arriving in Shambhala with unexcelled perfect enlightenment to enjoy perfection and nirvana in the Garden of Eden, to level up with the Alpha Centaurians and just feel orgasmic all day. That is actually all possible, though. So that's my little asterisk.
I just meant in the
actually
beginning.
is all possible.
In the beginning, you held up the cup, and Eugene said, "Well, the first thing I think of is orange," and it's okay. Like, it doesn't, words or no words, as long as you're doing that interaction with the environment, and the orange isn't something that slows you down. It doesn't matter whether you've thought orange or didn't think anything specific. You are aware of whether you thought temperature, whether you thought deliberate beverage, whether it doesn't matter, or whether you thought nothing, as long as that flow is, that movement and collaboration is happening.
Right. All right. So that brings us to the next 3 pillars, or the next 3 allies, and these can be voices. And this is probably going to be something, though, that is a little bit down the road in this practice, a little bit of accumulation, a little bit of doing it, a little bit of, here I am, where's my mind? Are these thoughts serving me? Is it repetitive? Is it habitual? P1, P2, we've been doing this for a little while. We've been asking questions and working together, and we have a little bit of a background of attention. It's probably going to make more sense to use these allies at that point. But I don't know. So I don't want to put anybody in a box. You can use these allies at any time that you see fit, because this is your practice. But in my own experience, I found that these voices were a little bit more accessible when I had experienced it more. So it was more believable to me. I understood it more. So then I started to use these words. Now I have simply categorized them and organized them. So I'm just curious, but does anybody remember what that next pillar would have been?
Deliberate
This
modulation.
is deliberate modulation. And that is essentially choosing how you want to feel. And right now I feel pressure on the inner wall of my bladder, so I'm going to go use the restroom, and then we'll talk about this one.
That's sensing in.
Exactly. And yeah, okay, we'll leave it there. All right. All right. Any questions or anything so far? Anyone have a sticky point? Because it's going to get groovy here now, I think. And actually, I think the next three allies are going to be the ones that this group can use the most because you guys have been practicing for a while. So, okay, so deliberate modulation. In seers training, or the seers, what I would call the seers practice, deliberate modulation is essentially choosing how you want to feel using only your attention. And that might be theory at this point for you. I don't know, but, or it might be even hypothesis. This hasn't really been proven to you at all. But for me, this is beyond theory. It's practical, that I can choose how I want to feel literally by pointing my attention. So when I get into the seers practice, I can actually demonstrate that. I can show somebody what to do with their attention in their body and in their moment to help facilitate certain feelings, if that makes sense. Okay. What I'm suggesting now is a way to help get you into that seers practice from warrior training, and it's a part of warrior training as well, but using these voices can help that transition in the practice, if that makes sense. So the voice of deliberate modulation in warrior training, I would call it setting up a mood, creating the mood of a warrior. Now, this isn't philosophical, existential mumbo jumbo. This is talking to yourself in a way that will be productive, in a way that is actually true. And I'm not going to convince you today that you are a conscious creator or you have that capability to be that, or, that our minds and, conscious creation, all of that stuff. I'm not going to get into that. But what I am suggesting is that your voice can actually create your mood and how you feel. That's not that far-fetched, is it? You're actually doing that when you're creating an uncomfortable mood. So when you're creating with words, remember, our body can react to things as well. We can have a traumatic event, and that traumatic event is translated into our bodies so that now our body reacts every single time that there is that trigger. The good news is that if our mind isn't perpetuating that trigger, we can actually learn to dissolve that as well. So we're never necessarily, bound to that in the body. It can release naturally on its own without trying to control, without trying to release it. You don't have to do that. If you're not in a form of psychological resistance, it will release on its own. You're a self-cleaning oven. Like you'd be really surprised what will happen on its own if we just get out of our own way. And by getting out of our own way, I mean we are no longer thinking repetitive, habitual thoughts that do not serve us, that do not serve other people. It is trying to control, it is labeling, it is judging, it is trying to figure it out, it is trying to understand, it is trying to convince other people, it is trying to change other people, and none of that cognition has benefited us or our society, not really. In a manner of speaking, Ida, yes. So this voice, the voice that I'm talking about, is really going to create your mood. It's going to create, and I like the word mood because it's almost like an elongated emotion. It's almost like a background emotion. And Eckhart Tolle would he would also describe moods as more, they're emotional, of course. It is a reaction. It is a response theory, just like emotion is, but it's more elongated. It's more of a background. It's more kind of just humming back there, and you're not really consciously aware of it. What we're doing is we're creating our mood, which means that the mood is now a derivative of conscious awareness. You have created it. Does that make sense? And it will involve talking to yourself, telling yourself something to create a certain mood, to create a certain emotion even, so you can feel a certain way. Does that make sense? And the only thing that you're really doing is directing your attention to achieve that, though. So the feeling is coming as a derivative of your attention being a certain direction, being a certain way. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? Or do you have an example?
Like a mantra.
Yes. It would seem a lot like a mantra. And so the only difference is that a mantra will sound almost like something you've said before. Maybe you even have it written down. So you could write down a mantra.
I do.
There's also this other half of it where it's actually, it might even sound like something you've never said before to yourself, but it feels true. It resonates with you. It helps you create a mood of, for example, the first time that I felt the vacation feeling and I started to categorize it in my mind. I'm like, like I can actually, and then I learned how to do this. And I talked about this very early on. I learned how to create the feeling of vacation at work. Like those are usually two, opposite things. Vacation and working, those don't usually go hand in hand. They're supposed to be opposites. But I was able to create that feeling of vacation by setting up a mood because I was using my verbal cognition, words, in a very particular way. Does that make sense? And it's not necessarily dependent on a belief because it can be a part of the present moment as it's occurring. And so, this cup, I don't have to believe that this cup is in my, it doesn't require belief necessarily. Belief involves words, involves concepts. Does that make sense? The recognition of it as a cup, there's a whole lot of other cognition that's occurring. The logic and feeling of it in my hand, that is a type of cognition that's occurring that we would call, higher reasoning centers, but I don't have to think that in words. I don't have to think this is orange unless I want to. I don't have to think this is smooth if I don't want to, or that, this cup could represent the totality of my experiences and, the existence of Ernest up to this point. It could represent that if I wanted it to. So the idea that we're talking about now, yes, Edith, go ahead.
Sorry, Ernest, say you're on your way to meet somebody and you haven't seen them for a while and you're driving there and you say, well, I'm going to set the mood of fun for today. I'm going to meet my sister and she may talk about things, about health things and things, but I'm going to set the mood for fun and keep it lighthearted. So that's my mood. So the minute I see her, I'm going to have a smile on my face and I'm going to set that mood. Is that the sort of thing you're talking about?
Sort of. You also interjected a battleground. So
okay.
in your example, you interjected a battleground. So you can use these voices to interact with battlegrounds, but you can also use these voices just because you want to feel something, right? So let's take your exact example, but let's remove the undesired stimuli. So you could just say, you know what, I'm going to go on a trip and I'm going to carry the mood of the distant traveler. I can travel, I can be mysterious, I can explore, I don't have to have plans, I can just, I'm just going to go do some shit. I'm going to make the unknown known, right? And why would you do that? Because you want to. But maybe at another stage in this practice, you do it because you don't want to get bored. And then what you just described as a battleground, maybe you do it because you don't want to get irritated with the person that's sitting next to you who just loves to complain and talk about their ailments and injuries and what's not working out for them. You see what I mean? So you can use this voice at different stages.
Would that be the same as I'm so used to setting a mood for, to actually do, I'm so used to doing things to set a mood in the home. Like say say that it was Easter, I would create a whole scene around that to, chicks and bunnies and eggs, or Christmas or a birthday, or just lighting candles and lighting the fire at night to make it cozy. They're all things that you do to set a mood, and you get the mood from doing sometimes too, but you're saying you can get the mood from just
talking it to yourself.
Yes.
Using your internal dialogue.
Okay.
Yes.
Like music can set that mood too. You can use.
There are many ways.
Poetry.
And although we're using the word mood, if we wanted to, I'm not going to, we could use the word vibration. So to set your vibration, to set your frequency, to set your emotional output and how you feel, we could use those words if we wanted to. We don't have to. So another way to describe it could just be mood, how we feel, You know, where it could be a little bit emotional, it could be a little bit vibrational, which isn't necessarily an emotion, such as peace and joy and love. I don't consider those necessarily emotions because they're not necessarily a response to anything. So I could be in a dark void, and as long as I still have some sort of cognition and feeling, I can still feel appreciation for that. So I need even less and less and less to feel that, is what I'm saying. So, and when I say I need less and less, less exterior is required for that feeling. So you can set up a mood with ambiance. Yes, you can set up a mood with things around you. Even your imagination, you can set up a mood with that. However, what I'm talking about with these specific allies, with this specific practice that I'm describing, is to use words, is to talk yourself, talk your mood. Does that make sense? And you can get really groovy with this, like you really can. So when I say that I'm setting the mood of timelessness, what I'm really talking about is collaborating with the nature of infinity, that I am exploring the unknown in that moment when I'm doing that. So when I go hiking, I talk myself into the mood of the explorer of the unknown. I want to feel that, right? Someone might be like, whoa, shit, Ernest, like, what are you talking about? It's a feeling. I'm creating this mood, this feeling. And nowadays, I don't need as much words. I get it. But I'm not leveled up. I'm not better. If I require words, I'll use words. But as it turns out, the more I practice, the less I need the cognition, and the more I can just direct my attention, and I feel that. Does that make sense? But there was a time when I would talk myself into these moods, and that's a great way to use the voice in your head that's already going 500 miles an hour. Why not just use that momentum in a way that can benefit you? That's not necessarily the way that Donna is thinking. It's not necessarily the way the Pope or the Dalai Lama is thinking. So I'm not telling you what to think. We're just talking about principles and dynamics that could lead the direction of the thought could lead down a direction to where you feel better, to where you're doing more of your practice. Most importantly, you're engaging your pillars of attention. So yeah, Ida, this is everything that you're saying, except for also using your internal verbal cognition to point towards the direction of how you want to feel. You won't always have to use these words, I get it, but use them until you don't. That's fine. Yes, Donna, go ahead.
Yeah, I think Ida has the idea of it right in the example with her sister, except that it's less about, I mean, you have those thoughts, these things might happen, I don't want her to do this, I'd rather her do this, I'd rather us have this experience, but it comes from a feeling place of, I love when I'm laughing with my sister and when we share common ground and whatever else she loves about that time with her sister. So if she can use words a lot, and that's where frequency and vibration can also, it's a feeling, like Shana said. If she can align herself with the feeling of fun with her sister, it may include, the way she sets the table or the way that but those aren't the things that get you there. It's the feeling that gets you there. So if you can align with that frequency of fun with your sister, not only do you create a mood. Now, whether you're actually going to visit your sister or not, you're in that space. You're in the fun with my sister place. I've been using this a lot lately because I'm alone a lot, physically by myself. And I'm feeling the imbalance of that. And I've also been sleeping more and I feel a little sad. Like I feel a dullness to my experience. And I can easily have thoughts that are the area of alone and lonely and unsupported and unheard, and all of the things that go along with that feeling, all of the thoughts that go along with that feeling. And then I realize I don't have to think that. I can deliberately, yeah, depression. I can deliberately modulate to another feeling. I've lived 63 years, almost soon 63 years on this planet, and I know what connection and support and love in my direction and reciprocated feels like. I know what that feels like, and I know that that those things are still true, even though I might not be feeling that. And I prefer to align with the vibration of supported and loved and connected and buoyant and all the things that go along, all the words to me that go along with that feeling. So I can modulate to that feeling. I can look outside. I mean, I even can conjure up circumstances where that has happened. Even a Zoom meeting with my family, even just before class started, reading about the new baby coming into our family. That gave me all of those feelings that I may have not placed my attention on, that have allowed this dulling of my senses to occur. So I'm going to choose to align. It's like turning a radio dial for me. I can be on any number of the frequencies. They're all within my choice. Which ones feel better and which ones do I want to align with, and what either setting the table or activities or whatever can contribute to that, great. Those actions aren't going to bring me the feeling. It's aligning with the vibration, the resonance, the memory, whatever tools I need to do to deliberately modulate with the feeling of support and love and connection is what I need to do for myself. And I don't have to do anything necessarily. I could just sit here and get there. But whatever, wherever I'm at, that's where I'm gonna direct my attention, and perhaps do something, perhaps not do something. Just the act of tuning to the radio dial is an action. It's an activity.
Yep. As long as that first pillar is active, and that's what it means, active. It's an activity. It's a doing. Shana used the term action step. It's what's right in front of you. It's the step right in front of you, to pay attention to the step that you're walking on right in front of you. So now, if I were to relate this to the seer's practice, the seer has done so much tea and so much embodiment that it is literally just the direction of attention to create the feeling. And that's the only difference. What we're talking about now is using words to direct the attention that way to create the feeling. Now, the next one is the essence, sensing essence. And in Tai Chi is Jing is sensing energy. And I've kind of borrowed that, but the way that I'm looking at it is the first one is creating how you want to feel. The second one is discovering feelings that you never knew were there. And you can talk yourself into that. Now, the way that you talk that, though, is first the feeling arrives, and now you're talking about the feeling. You're emphasizing it using your voice. That is an ally. So let's say, Ida, let's say you're traveling with your friend, and your friend actually starts to talk about something completely different. You have set up a battleground, and then all of a sudden your friend talks about tea. You didn't even know that they were watching these videos, and well, no, that they would have saw you, so that's not a good example. But no, they're practicing a mindfulness technique, and they're talking about how this mindfulness technique is working, and it ends up being a really great drive. And then all of a sudden, this feeling of unexpectedness. It's like, oh, that was so unexpected. And now what I'm describing now is going to be kind of goofy because I don't have good words to describe these feelings. You're discovering it. There's not a lot of language around some of this stuff for you yet, but you're discovering. So, Jean, before you had grandkids, you could have never felt the feeling of what those grandkids bring you. You know, you can feel what kids bring you, but that's a little bit different probably. I don't know. I'm assuming that's a little bit different than what the feeling of grandkids, because that's like, you know, that's on top of something. That's the kids are having kids, and those kids will be having kids, and that's the, you know, that a beautiful thing in life. Fresh, yeah. So that's a feeling that when it occurs, you can talk it, you can word it, and then that will become more accessible later when you want to create it. So now you're exploring, you're discovering, you voice it out in words. Eventually in the seer's practice, you won't have to word it. You don't have to voice it. But what I'm talking about now is using the voice because, you know, our mind is still moving that way. You know, like we're still thinking, and that's okay. We're just going to have functional thinking, thinking that serves us, that's beneficial. So does this make sense? The difference between these two, the first one is more, you know, today I got a long ass drive. It's a 12-hour drive, so I'm going to create the feeling of the traveler, the exploring traveler.
So you're kind of saying
Yes.
like deliberate modulation, you're kind of remembering a feeling
In a
and
manner of
going
speaking,
to
yes.
that feeling
Mm-hmm.
rather than with the sensing essence, that feeling just comes to you. Like you are just, you're engaging and you have this feeling and then it's like, oh, it feels like I can feel the vacation feeling. Like it just comes to you. You don't have to think about it.
No, that's not the difference between these two pillars, because you don't have to think about even the first one down the road. So I don't have to think I want to feel timelessness. I can just direct my attention and feel it. The second one is more of a discovery, where I loved where you were going in the beginning. The first one, it's actually the fourth pillar, but it's the modulation. That's remembering. That could be remembering a feeling that you want to feel again, or maybe even kind of making something up. Maybe you've never felt, you know, the distant traveler, but you kind of want to make that up. You want to feel that.
Okay.
The sensing energy, you're now sensing the mountain in a way you never have before. So go ahead and voice it to yourself. Go ahead and say,
So
like,
it's
oh my God,
new
like
feeling.
it could be very new. Yes, typically it's going to be a new feeling. It's a discovery, because we're explorers. We are exploring the unknown and making it known to us.
Gotcha.
Can I give an example and you tell me if it's right? You gave the 3 paths, right? You have 3 paths in front of you, and Jean said one of them is kind of underwater and muddy. And you feel you're going to take that path anyway because you know it's the shortest one, and you decide that you are very balanced and aligned, and you have a feeling about I'm still going to go this way, and I am going to sense in to the walk along a path that has water on it. And so you embrace the essence of feeling mud under your feet, of feeling water up to your ankles, of, you know, it doesn't matter how long it takes to get there, and it doesn't matter whether it's more arduous or not. You're not going to judge it. You're just going to feel into the essence of being a person walking this path.
Yeah, and then maybe you get this feeling of freedom, and it's like a freedom that you've never really felt before, and you're like, and then you start talking it to yourself. You're like, this is a freedom that I've never felt before. It feels like I could walk anywhere. Like my feet are kissing the earth.
It feels ancient.
Yeah.
I feel connected to, I don't know, my ancestors, whatever.
Yeah, or when the grandkids come and like you feel the timeless nature of the joy, you know, of attention. Maybe you've never really seen the pureness of attention in another person until you pay attention to those grandkids and you see how authentic their play is, and you see how authentic their communication is, and then you have this thought, that's non-resistance, and then you feel it. So you start to dialogue what you're feeling now that's new because you're discovering. So let's say Gene drives up to a mountain and he gets moved by the mountain. He doesn't necessarily have to think anything. I'm not saying that he has to, but maybe, you know, that feeling, he's felt it, he's digging into it, but he really wants to dig into it more. He wants to elongate that feeling. So now he starts to describe the majesty that he feels, the power that he feels from the mountain, you know, timelessness again, because there's timelessness in everything, but the timelessness of how long, the awe. Yeah, awe is a great ally. Does that make sense?
Yeah, going back to Donna's example as well. So the beginning where she said she wanted to choose, or whoever's walking down, they wanted to choose this path, and they wanted to, you know, feel the feeling of walking down a muddy path. So that right there, if we were going to label that, that would be deliberate modulation. But like when you get on the path and then these new feelings come, that would be the sensing essence. Is that what, just to get it clear?
Yeah. And you don't have to dialogue it, but if you do, you could make it more accessible to find it again later, or you could just prevent unbeneficial thinking from occurring.
Yeah, and so
rather
when you
than
do it later, that would be you're deliberately modulating that feeling that you felt that
Mhm.
new feeling that you felt when you walked down the path and you felt the freedom.
Yes.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah, what does the
Does that?
mountain have to
Yep.
teach me? What does the path have to teach me? What's the dialogue, with words or not words, that I'm having with the experience, the essence of it?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And that is a good observation, Jean, because the more we climb up these pillars, the closer we're getting the flow. Yeah. Perpetual flow and bursts of flow. But have you ever had a great tennis game, found a lot of flow, but then you didn't have a lot of flow in the rest of your day?
Sure.
Yeah, the flow at the tennis game didn't necessarily guarantee that you would have flow throughout the rest of the day, right? But what if you started to use your verbal cognition to focus on all that flow and how it happened and how it felt? You can help carry that momentum throughout your day because you're reminding yourself of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but what I used to do was play tennis for 5 or 6 hours so I wouldn't lose the flow. But then my knees would
Well,
give out. Yeah, my knees would give out. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so moving right along, Shayna has to go at 8, so I just want to get to the which is essentially going to be the 6th pillar, and then the other voice. It's the voice, and it's the voice that, you know, I'm looking for, that this practice will build, and you will express it very likely. I don't want to put anybody in a box, but so the 6th one, which is going to be the 6th pillar T, is the act of allowing. This can become your most beneficial voice, because you can remind yourself of the act of allowing. I do not have to try to control. I do not have to try to change. I do not have to try to be thinner or faster or stronger or better or plus than or greater than. I don't have to try to change anything. I can go back to my practice. I can go back to the present moment, and then we could just go back through those pillars again. I can be present. I can pay attention without thought streams necessarily occurring. I can talk this in my own mind using my own voice. I can be present. I can get the most out of my life experience. I will offer how T fits into behavioral change. And guess what? It's back to the practice. It's nothing different. We are going to change. The more that we direct our attention, the more we will change naturally without trying to control. So this is what that voice would sound like to me. Ernest, the mind gets on this erroneous time scale. It's okay. You don't have to be the Tai Chi master now. You don't have to be yada yada right now. You are the totality of your experience, and you can engage the present moment. You can engage the act of allowing. You can reduce resistance because of that, because you're engaging, resistance is reduced. Based on how we're defining resistance, resistance is fundamentally reduced when I'm engaging the present moment, which is the 3rd pillar, and I can literally talk myself through all of those steps leading up to that 6th pillar of the act of allowing. Does that make sense? And that is really reminding yourself of this practice. That one is going to be the game changer. So you can take this how you want to. Yes, Shayna, please.
You kind of accepted the 3rd pillar. You've accepted that the tools within the 3rd pillar, this is how I engage presence and mindfulness and allow for deliberate modulation and sensing essence to occur. Because there's a time, like I remember at the beginning of my practice, I wasn't accepting the 3rd pillar. I was doubting some of the tools that I was using. I was questioning them, which I wasn't present or mindful while questioning those, the tools I was using. I was expecting things for them from the tools I was using, which I was not present or mindful, and I was judging them. So yeah, you've accepted that the tools that you're using takes you away, and you start to recognize, through your own embodiment of the practice, being your own coach, you see your own bullshit, and you see, okay, yeah, I'm questioning my own practice and not allowing that 3rd pillar to work and, allow the presence and mindfulness to occur.
Exactly. And this will become your ally. I can't even begin to exaggerate how beneficial this voice as an ally has been for me. Because as in this society, we're being encouraged to have a multiplicity of self, to divide ourselves into the person we are, the person we want to be, the person that other people think we are, the person that we think we are, higher self, lower self, truer self, diviner self. Now we have all of these different selves, and we're striving for all of these different things, which essentially is a focus on lack. You're focusing on what is not cognitively, or what you think is not. So this practice, and when you're using words in this way, what I'm recommending is that we remind ourselves that I just need to do my practice. That's it. I just need to pay attention to the present moment on purpose. And because I have reduced resistance, that's what that does. That's what happens. That's the natural occurrence. It's a happy, we're working with the dynamics of the universe. So if I'm engaging the world more, I'm resisting it less. That's just by definition what is occurring. So since I'm engaging the world more, I can move with it more, I can adapt with it more, I can change with it more, I can create with it more, I can do what I want more in this present moment if I'm paying attention to it, moving with it, adapting with it, not trying to control it, not trying to manipulate it. So this is not looking at habits that we want to change and isolating them and declaring war on them. When I start to get to that, we'll be doing the exact same thing. We'll be going back. So here I would set down a cup of water and I would set down a cup of soda. Which do I want to drink? Okay, I'll drink the soda, but I'm really going to pay attention to it. I'm going to drink it. I'm going to pay attention to how it makes me feel. And then the next time I'm going to drink the water, I'm going to pay attention to it, how it makes me feel. And guess what? I feel better when I drink water. And because I'm paying attention to the feeling, I get back into Freudian psychology. I start to seek what is pleasurable and avoid what is displeasurable. And because I'm paying so much attention to the feeling, I'm not just paying attention to the flavor, I'm paying attention to the feeling. I'm not just paying attention to the sugar rush, I'm paying attention to the sugar crash afterwards. And I'm able to feel all of that. And so my body, my mind just started to go for the water more. Does that make sense?
Yes,
So,
but you were paying attention to the feeling because that's what you've
The
chosen
feeling.
to do with your life, not
Yes.
because you needed to evaluate the soda.
Exactly. Right. Which is the only time that I will ever talk about behavioral change is if the person is fully embodying the practice first. Otherwise, we're getting into areas of psychology that not only am I not technically qualified to talk, I don't want to. I don't want to ever
So
teach
choosing the
cognitive
water
behavioral
was
therapy.
the virtue of the practice. Choosing the
Yes.
water was an effect of the practice.
Yes.
It wasn't the intention of it.
And if you're using the voice of that discovery of what would be that fifth pillar, then you're drinking water. Gene's drinking water one day and he's like, man, I feel really refreshed. He's like, I actually feel really good drinking this water. It's not just, tasteless, colorless substance that doesn't serve me. It's like, this is actually cool and refreshing and I enjoy it and I like it and it has a cucumber in it. And he's talking to himself about this amazing discovery that is a feeling that he can recreate later. And if we just follow the path that I've just outlined, that leads to this. So this is the final thing that I would talk about. Okay, Shayna's got to go, so I'm going to wrap up with this and then we can talk about it more later. And so we drew these other pillars. And the other pillars were, if we can remember, we have deliberate modulation, and these aren't necessarily in an order at this point. Choosing how you want to feel, and this is sensing energy, sensing essence, and this is, I'm spelling essence wrong, so I'm just going to do energy. Sensing energy. So I'm sensing the world around me and I can dialogue that to myself. When I'm feeling the vacation feeling, I can talk it out if I want to. Again, you don't have to. If you're in flow, you won't want to. Right, Gene? If you're in flow and in your tennis game, you're not going to take yourself out of flow to talk to yourself. So I'm not recommending that. So you use the voices, you use these allies when they're beneficial to you. So when you're in the flow, you don't have to take yourself out of flow to analyze flow. But when you're in flow and you're starting to kind of, after your tennis game, you can help elongate the flow by reminding yourself with words. And so after sensing energy, so we have deliberate modulation, sensing energy, and we have the act of allowing. The reason this is the act of allowing is because it's only engaging our attention. That's all this practice has ever done from beginning to end, and that's all it's ever doing, is just interacting with our attention. So I'm going to redo sensing energy. And then that leads to this effect. And this is another voice, but it is the voice. And I'm sure you guys can guess what I call it. And this is not something that you can manipulate. This is not something that you can control. You can't, no matter how much you try. You will just paint yourself into a corner of writer's block. You will paint yourself into a corner of frustration and trying to figure it out for the rest of your life if that's what you do. So what I'm talking about now is the voice of power. The voice of power is creative. It reinforces what you know about the world. It is fundamentally intelligent. And what I mean by the voice of power at this point, you are accessing infinite intelligence. You are it. There is no difference from you and everything else. It already exists. But we begin to access it when we are in the act of allowing. When we are in flow and synchronization with the world around us, the voice in your head will all of a sudden be appropriate. It will be on time. It will be welcoming. It will be creative. It will be new. It will reinforce, I can just cross that little mud puddle with no problem. You will just tell yourself that, or eventually you'll just do it. You'll feel the power and you'll just walk across the fucking puddle and it was never a problem. Or you decide to go left. You realize that this could be a potential affirmation from the world around you. And if it has this puddle, maybe it gets muddier and muddier as it goes, so I'll just go left. I have no time constraint, so why not just go left? Yes, it's longer, but who cares? I got all day, so I'm just going to go left and enjoy going left. That could be the answer as well. That voice arrives. This is an arrival, but we're not declaring war on it. I would never recommend redirecting thought that is original, that is new, that is fresh, that is exciting until it's not, until it starts to become repetitive, until it starts to become habitual. Then write that shit down and go back to your practice. But there could become a time, and I believe that if we practice this practice long enough, your cognition will start to benefit you. Your thought will start to reinforce true things about the present moment without you even necessarily trying. There's no trying, it will occur. Does that make sense? And now all of a sudden, Mike still talks to himself, but he doesn't do it, incessantly. He doesn't do it unconsciously. It's not repetitive. It's not habitually trying to control. It's not analyzing everything constantly. It's not comparing and contrasting. It's not trying to figure it out. It's not labeling and judging. Instead, the voice has all of a sudden become creative with ideas and connections and feelings. And all of a sudden, there's a voice telling you that you can, when before you were telling yourself that you couldn't, but you believe it now. You know that you can. Maybe this voice is telling you what's what about the present moment. Intuition, expressed as a voice. And maybe other examples too. And so that's this practice, the allies of power, using your words, using your own verbal cognition as a tool to point back to the present moment, much like the rings of power, but I'm being a little bit more specific. So as we go throughout the day, can you activate the voice of presence? Just focus on the first one. Can you use your own cognition to remind yourself to be present, and maybe even you are labeling it, but it's not necessarily judging it. You're acknowledging it. You're just going to use words to acknowledge it. That's not necessarily judgment. just as Gene can discern whether to go straight or to go left without thinking about it, without words. His mind is still involved because he's never no mind. You know, there's all kinds of things. There's still working memory involved. He understands what puddles mean, like he gets it. He knows how to walk, so he you know, physically he's going to know how to interact with it. And long-term memory, you know, he knows that this is where he wants to go, and that's the experience. Yeah. All right. So any questions about the allies of power and how we can use them in this practice? You can start with just the voice of presence. You can move into the voice of mindfulness. So when you find yourself judging, you can remind yourself that you don't have to, that you don't have to label it, that you don't have to judge it necessarily. Does that all make sense? And I know I'm using the word not, but you use the word not to go back to the practice, to go back to what you can do, because you don't have to. It's true. You don't have to sit there and label the present moment. That's a true thing. I don't have to do that. Like, I get it. I'm using the words I don't have to. That's not a focus on lack. That's a true thing. I don't have to do this. I can choose something else. And now that's when we focus on what is, when we start to focus on the something else. I can do something else, and now I'm going to. I am present. I am mindful, and I am choosing my point of attention. And then, of course, you can talk your points of attention out.
These are the fundamentals that I learned this practice on and have been using all the time. It's the things that I go back to when it starts to feel complicated, or when I make it complicated unnecessarily. But yeah, this is the beginning of the practice and the basics of it. And depending on how practiced you are, without using phases of change, or higher or lower or better or worse, depending on where you are, there really are the fundamentals that always go back. That's what the essence of something is. If I could make a quick recommendation, and my brother told me about it, there's a Netflix program called Atypical. It's about an autistic boy and his family and the people around him, and how people traverse understanding life from different points of view. And having an high functioning autistic person's perspective is really helpful, because he actually goes through these things that we talk about all the time in the practice. And it's very light, it's not heavy, but it's about, and in the beginning you feel that he's the one with the deficit, because he can't understand the world the way the rest of us do. And then as the series goes on, you realize he has the most instrumental understandings about the basics of how to modulate, and how to find balance, and how to interact in social without making himself crazy. One of the episodes was about finding the essence of something. It was an art class, and he had to find the essence of the penguin. And being a very logical person, he couldn't understand, what do you mean the essence? What does essence means? And he's Googling it and he's trying to find it. And so anyway, it really does explain a lot of the stuff that you talk about here, in experiential little episodes from different people's point of view. So I just wanted to add that if you want to watch that, it's you can see, I mean, I do that with everything now, just from practicing all this time. I'm seeing when I watch something and I'm trying to stay present in my body. Yeah, atypical. I see the principles in things happening around me. I make that a game sometimes. Like, you know, it takes me out of judgment, just looking at the principles of it, seeing where there's momentum, seeing where there's habit, seeing where there's sensing energy, seeing where there's not sensing energy, seeing the piece behind it, you know, but it's always with these basics in mind. So yeah, I like that we revisited that from the perspective we have now. I enjoyed the class.
Awesome. So real quick, I'll touch on what Sonia just said as well. So sometimes when I start thinking about a really beautiful memory or feeling that I experienced, it makes me a focus on lack. So, and then other times it can feel really good. Now we're talking about balance. Remember that existing in any extreme for too long can cause suffering. So I'm recommending that When we pay attention to something, when we direct our attention somewhere, it is to feel something presently. It's not just to think back. So I don't go back just to go back, you know, and I actually don't go back visually very often in memory because I'm so much into the feeling side of things. I can just feel what it felt like to hit the door, you know, on summer vacation. So here's how it could look. You can think about what it's like to hit the door. And so Sonia, also what we're talking about is a little bit, and I don't want to say advanced, but we got to do this practice a little bit more really to understand what we're talking about with feeling something and focusing on the feeling of it. So here's two different things I could do. I could think about the moment that I hit the door, and then there's some, you see how I did it instantly? I felt the summer. Because of the memory, I felt the summer. Now I can choose to focus on the feeling of summer. That's no longer focusing on the memory necessarily, because I have just created the feeling of summer now. It's happening now. I have recreated the feeling, and that feeling is occurring presently. So I'm focusing on the present moment and what I've just created, which is the feeling of summer vacation. Now, in this other example, I'm just going to continue to focus on the memory of it and not the feeling. Eventually, it could lead to a focus on lack because you may not be feeling on the feeling of summer right now. So that's not occurring presently because you're just thinking about the memory of it. And there could be all kinds of things, like maybe after you hit that door, you got punched in the mouth. So you went from the wonderful feeling of summer, and then it's like, oh yeah, and then I got punched in the mouth afterwards, and now you're going into cognition. So the thinking has to be in balance. And as long as the thinking is pointing back to the practice, we're doing this practice. Does that make sense? So you just did a good job of explaining balance.
It may not be a useful tool for you. If each time you conjure up a memory to produce a feeling, all you can think of is, I wish it was summer now, then it's probably not a good technique to use.
Yeah, and that's why these other three pillars are after the first three are well practiced. Otherwise, we could be really doing something different with our cognition, and it's not just presence, mindfulness, and where is my attention and did I put it there. So you have memory. So you can access that memory and put your attention on that memory. That's your choice. And then that memory can create a feeling, and you can, and this is what I'm recommending, put your attention now on that feeling. And that's actually what Abraham Hicks has recommended. I'm just telling you how. I'm giving a good example of how we can learn to do this and not just focus on the feeling. And it's like, oh, exactly. Yeah, that makes sense.
And there are times when I've been coasting for a really long time and I'm feeling, I don't know, unsupported. And if I think about what it was like when I felt supported, I'm just going to feel like, and I don't feel like that now, and it sucks, and I wish I was back to that. So I have to go back to, here I am in my body. Let me find something to appreciate in this moment. I have to go back to the basics still now.
And I think maybe one of the next workshops or one of the next things that we'll talk about will be the rule of three and the three-strike rule. That is probably going to be really important to Sonia in her practice. It is embodiment. That is when we do start to interact with our cognition. So we actually start to interact with our thinking, but to point back to the practice, not to manipulate it, not to necessarily change it. You're not going to think how I think. You're not going to think how Donna thinks necessarily, but we're going to be more deliberate with our attention using the rule of three and the three-strike rule. So that could be beneficial. But so what I would recommend is that first voice, the first ally. Use your voice to be present. Use the voice to remind yourself to look at the note card. And then once you look at the note card, then you can remind yourself of what the note card says, and then you're on your way. You're back to your practice. You're back to paying attention and engaging the present moment using a deliberate point of attention. And that's checking in as often as possible, right? And then if you chose to use the voice of mindfulness, it's just you can remind yourself that you don't have to label and judge everything, that you can engage it. And then, so the voice of mindfulness is simultaneously reminding you to go to the next one, which is your tricks of attention. It's reminding you about your tricks of attention, your deliberate, so you can use all three of these in tandem. Does that make sense? And it will start to lead to the feeling. And now everything is about the feeling. That's what seers training is. At that point, we're feeling everything. And everything that we're creating is a result of how we feel. That's why I brush my teeth now 3 times a day. That's why I don't leave my towel on the bed. That's why I can interact with people in a more efficient manner than I used to. I'm learning how to socially interact much better. You know, I'm better at keeping my word. I'm better at getting things done. I'm constantly evolving and moving and changing and growing. And that's all of us can ask for, is to continuously be learning and growing and, you know, getting the best feeling that we can from our life experience as much as we can. I think that's all we really want. And that's why this practice, that's exactly what this practice will do. Exactly. It's a practical way to get to that feeling. And Sonia, once upon a time, I was watching, it was American Idol, I believe, or The Voice. And one of the judges said that you can't teach somebody how to feel. They're very technical, they're great singers, but they just don't feel it. And I didn't agree with that. That didn't make any sense to me. Why not? Why can't you show somebody? Now, I can't teach Gene how to feel how I feel, but I can teach Gene how to redirect his mind so that he can feel everything that he's feeling or what is potentially available to him. He can feel that. That's empowerment. Exactly. Yeah, what we focus on grows in our experience, and that's what we're learning to do, is deliberately focus, not hustle ourselves, not just go from one type of thinking to another type of thinking, but instead we start to use our attention to engage the world around us, and we start to get a feeling from that, a derivative from that, and I call that the 3rd ring of power. Timelessness, essence, these feelings that we want. And it can make us very happy. But the first feeling and the foundational feeling is peace. Everything will just come from peace. I can be a little bit sad and still feel peace. I can be a little bit excited and still feel peace. And I'll always be moving and adapting to things in my environment. The only question, where is my mind and do I feel peace? That's it. That's what all of this practice is about. If the answer is yes, if I know where my mind is and I do feel peace, love, joy, vibrancy, connection, understanding, insight, creativity, it's all going to come. It just comes. It's like it's not there and then it's there.
I
It's
couldn't
like, okay.
choose peace. I couldn't use peace as my beginning. I could choose less resistance. I feel
Sure.
this is less crazy than I was just, this is quieter, this is more still, this is more deliberate. I could choose that. I couldn't choose peace right from the beginning because I was
I
going through
understand.
suffering.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
peace wasn't my barometer. Peace was my goal, but it wasn't my barometer in the beginning. Just a less resistant thought, a more deliberate thought. And then the other things started to fall away in my absence of attention on it.
Right. So what you're saying is, where is my mind and do these thoughts serve me? Are these thoughts benefiting me? If not, back to the practice, back to the present moment. And then that's less crazy. What I'm talking about is seer. I feel my life. I can feel everything about it. I can feel what's not in alignment. I can feel what is in alignment, and I can just navigate by the feeling of everything. And that's what Abraham is talking about. And this practice is just a valid way to get there. And it's not really a getting there. It's just a paying attention to there, really. Again, it's just back to attention. And then it gets to the point where I'm in that hydrostasy bubble. I always feel peace. That is inner peace. I always feel it. Now, there have been moments where I'm getting really close to not feeling it. Or maybe I'm even outside of it for a little bit. But the point is, I can adapt, I can learn, I can change, I can grow, and still feel peace. And at times, feel a lot of happiness. But there are times where I don't, but I still feel peace. And that's fine. All right, well, that is the allies of power, and we can continue to talk about this as we go along, but I think it's a nice little supplemental practice that could be added on pretty much at any point, but especially when a person is ready to start with the embodiment of the mindfulness practice. It's not embodying tea, it's embodying mindfulness. That's what tea is, embodying mindfulness. And it's a practical method of how to do that. All right, so take some of these things and we can add them to the complete practice throughout the day. So we've woken up, I mean, we're all awake. Have we engaged our present moment? Have we chosen to engage it? Have we set up our toolbox? Are we prepared for our battlegrounds? Are we ready to engage our allies? Do we have our allies with us? I have my ally of power with me. They will help me redirect back to power, which is maybe Michael text messages me and he's like, man, Ernest, everything you just said was stupid. It was just the dumbest shit I've ever heard in my life, and I'm never coming back. So I would probably have an ally right there ready for me, that Ernest, you're just sharing your mind. You know, you're doing what you can and you're organizing things and you're not making promises or attempting to control. So beware of your intentions and attention and proceed forward. But do you see what I mean, Mike? I would need I know you're not going to.
No, I do though. You need your things in place.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Your tricks of attention in place.
Have your tricks of attention in place, but you can use that third voice, the third ally, the ally of deliberate attention. Talk out your tricks of attention. Don't just try to do them, talk them out to yourself. So that's probably one of your best allies in the beginning. I, in this moment, am paying attention to all of my vision. In this moment, I am paying attention to the rims of my glasses to help create peripheral vision. I am present. I am mindful. I don't have to label and judge. I'm instead just describing. Right? Does that make sense? And I'm pointing back to the present moment. I'm pointing back to the practice using my words. All right. So I hope your allies serve you. Keep your allies close to you because they can be very beneficial. And if you start to interject imagination, you could end up with an ally that talks to you, that reminds you, that is a part of your experience. And I'm not going to judge you for that because I did it. So, all right. Well, I will see you guys again soon. Tomorrow, actually. Tomorrow, 7 a.m. is our normal Tuesday and Wednesday. So, all right. We'll jump into a new topic. Donna, we're going to implement Sunday every week. Maybe we'll do the new topics on Sunday. Everything. Great segue. So just real quick, we're going to be offering more classes. So we're going to have more class time. I'm offering one-on-one time again. The book schedule, everything is going to start to come just a little bit more quicker and a little bit more organized because we're directing personal power. So I'm giving an example of it. I'm not trying to create an online business necessarily or anything like that. I'm creating a library. Between now and January 1st of 2022, I'm going to create a very extensive tea library, and hopefully I don't go broke doing it. But if I do, at least I have this awesome library and I'll go find a job. That's fine. But we're going to use the rest of this year to really focus on creating a solid library of videos, of audio, of text, of all the different things that describes this finely completed practice. And then we'll go from there. We'll see what happens. Hopefully we can start certifying teachers and other people can start sharing it and then, glass ceiling. Tomorrow is Monday. Oh, so okay, I'll see you guys Tuesday. Mm-hmm. All right. All right, thanks guys. I will see you Tuesday. I may watch Atypical, I may not. I'm not really great at watching things, but yes, we'll see. It is possible. If not probable, possible. We'll go with that. All right, I will see you guys later. Thanks for hanging out.
Yeah,
all right, bye guys.
We're not going to tell you what to think or do, Ernest, but whatever you choose.
Well, Gene just increased the probability of me watching Atypical. See, he knows me. All right, see you guys.